Welcome, everyone. This is Katy Wallace, and today we're talking about Kiss Those Sugar Blues Goodbye. I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I'm giving this talk in coordination with the Willie Street Co-op in Madison, Wisconsin. My business is Human Nature. I've been practicing as a naturopathic doctor here in Madison for 15 years. The information I'm giving today is for health education reasons only and should not be taken in place of medical advice. Besides offering these monthly talks at the co-op through Zoom, one of the things I do with the co-op is offer private one-on-one sessions for $45, and those are available in person at the stores and also via Zoom. I do have one opening available next Friday via Zoom, so if you're interested in that, reach out to me. Next month, we're going to talk about how the thyroid gland works. So if you have a thyroid issue or have always been curious about the thyroid, I'd encourage you to attend. I'm going to walk you through the physiology and encourage you to document how the physiology of the thyroid works. That'll be Wednesday, November 8th at 12 o'clock. If you have any questions while I'm talking, please feel free to put them in the chat. In fact, today I want to do a little more interaction, and I am going to ask you maybe to put some of your thoughts in the chat when we get to those slides. If you would like to see the recording of this talk, I will make it available on my website about 1 to 2 weeks after this program. All of my programs that I do via Zoom are available. So if you missed one or are curious about what's out there, just go to the humannaturellc.com website and the news tab. And then you'll see, like last month, I gave the histamine talk. The month before that was food-based cleansing, etc. So today what we're going to cover is, what's wrong with sugar? Why would you want to give up sugar? And then I'm going to talk about some of the key things that make it really hard for people to let go of sugar in their diet. And I recognize there are many reasons people will eat sugar, but I'll try to talk about some of the more common patterns that I see that contribute to someone feeling like they can't give up high carbohydrate foods, processed foods, or sugar in the diet. And then we'll end with several tips that might work for you to help you overcome sugar cravings. So I'd like to start with the premise that although at this point in history, we're not in a period where people experience micronutrient or vitamin deficiencies, right? Like we have access to plenty of food, vitamin C if we choose it. Instead, what's happening today is that we have an overabundance of calories and food available. And this is just an excerpt from a medical journal talking about how that actually leads to disease today. So rather than thinking about how do we get more of something, some of us are in a position to think about how do we make better choices and choose less of the thing that's harming us. Case in point would be sugar. So I'm going to be talking a lot about how sugar cravings are related to blood sugar control. I feel firmly that a lot of times there's a background blood sugar control issue or hormone imbalance, and it doesn't have to be a medically diagnosed problem, but you'll see what I mean. So it helps to understand these terms, blood glucose, insulin. Blood glucose is the level of sugar that's present in the blood, and it can be monitored using a glucometer, which is pictured here. When we eat a food that has sugar, and most foods do have some kind of natural sugar or carbohydrate, our pancreas releases insulin, which is a hormone that helps get the blood sugar into our body cells so we can use the sugar for energy. So you can think of insulin like a key that's going into a lock to help bring the sugar into our cells. However, what happens to all of us as we age is that we make more and more insulin, and this sets us up for something called insulin resistance. Basically, the body's making more insulin to try to get the same amount of fuel into the cell. And this has a lot of side effects and is not good for us at all. There are certain ways to work against this tendency, and I'll try to talk to you about those as we go. But the problem with too much insulin is that it drives inflammation in the body. We know this from numerous medical studies that when there's more insulin present, there's more inflammatory chemicals made by the immune system, and it's very difficult for the body to go back to homeostasis or go back to a healthful state without the inflammation. Some of the signs that this might be happening to you would be that you've eaten a great meal, but you still want something after the meal. You still want to eat something. That could be one sign that you're making more insulin than is healthy for you. You could also feel really sleepy or have brain fog after the meal, or overall just feel very fatigued from day to day. These are all early signs that there's something wrong with the blood sugar control and the body's making too much insulin and it's not burning the sugar very well for fuel. Like I said, this can lead to a lot of problems. It can lead to disease. This is well documented again in scientific literature. It can lead to a lot of hormone problems for men and women. So as we're aging, it can be really important to kind of get a handle on the amount of sugars and carbohydrates that we're eating. Incidentally, you can work against this tendency to be insulin resistant and more carbohydrate and sugar sensitive as you get older by building muscle. If you build muscle and do progressive strength training, you will increase your metabolism, and that is one way to improve your tolerance. There's actually a few other ways to improve your tolerance as well, like getting really good sleep and getting a lot of natural sunlight and outdoor activity. But most of us in this modern culture are sedentary and we're inside and we're losing muscle as we age. And so you have to actively really work for those health improvements if you want to offset the insulin. Otherwise, you've got to restrict your carbohydrate and sugar intake if you want to continue to be healthy as you're aging. So you can test these things and see how you are. You can meet with me and we can have a conversation about it if you want. Insulin levels and glucose levels can be tested in your blood. So you can get one of those glucometers that I pictured a couple slides back and prick your finger and see how you're doing after meals. You can see which foods are causing the blood sugar spike for you. You can also ask for testing through your doctor. Typically that's done in a fasted state. Hemoglobin A1C is another marker that's kind of an average of blood sugar control. And so you can tend to see when someone's losing blood sugar control based on that number as well. So signs that you're starting to lose blood sugar control include just having cravings for sugar and carbs. Because when your blood sugar levels are out of balance, it's very natural for the body to want more sugar and more carb because it's not getting what it needs inside the cells. Another common sign would be to be hangry, okay? Meaning when somebody's hungry, if they've gone too long without eating, their body's not getting enough glucose or blood sugar into the cells. And so they make hormones that help push the glucose into the cells better, the glucose that's remaining. So you might have heard of cortisol, which is one of the main stress hormones. Sometimes when people, cortisol is a stress hormone made by the adrenals. I have a whole other webinar about that if you're interested in it. It can be related to this topic. And sometimes people have problems with cortisol and they might have something called adrenal exhaustion or adrenal dysregulation. So some of you may have heard of that. And once you're not very good at making enough cortisol, you might even use other more powerful hormones like adrenaline, epinephrine, no epinephrine when you're hungry. And thus people can be very, very moody or have more extreme consequences when their blood sugar is gotten too low. Another common sign is that someone's sleepy after the meal. If you eat too many carbohydrates for you, you are going to be sleepy after the meal. The brain can only handle a narrow range of blood sugar, and if that level increases, you'll be sleepy and your brain will kind of shut down while it's taking all the extra fuel and trying to store it for later in the form of triglycerides. So if you've ever had a pancake breakfast and then needed to sleep on the couch, that's exactly what's happening. So if you're tired or sleepy after meals, that should be a big sign that whatever you ate for lunch was too many carbs for you. If you're just feeling unsatiated from a meal, that can be a sign that your blood sugar has been swinging and you need to make some adjustments in your lifestyle to help reduce that. It if you're craving more food after having a good meal, that's a sign that the blood sugar is swinging high and your body's trying to make insulin, but it's not able to get the fuel into the cell. So that's a sign of insulin resistance or a beginning of insulin resistance. Brain fog, again, I've already mentioned. Difficulty sleeping. So this is kind of like the hangry pattern where a lot of people will have trouble sleeping because their blood sugar is kind of going up and down all day. And the brain is like a big hog for fuel. And so if you don't have good blood sugar control when you're sleeping, and you run out of glucose, your body's going to make cortisol, or it's going to make even more excitatory hormones to try to keep getting fuel into the brain. And that will wake you up. So some of you might relate to that where you just sort of wake up and you're wide awake and you don't know why you're wide awake in the middle of the night. So if that's a pattern for you, that can often go back to loss of blood sugar control and making changes in the diet. I see this over and over. I see this happen every week when I work with people, helps people sleep better. Fatigue is a common sign of sugar problems because what will happen when the body becomes too dependent on carbohydrates is that it basically stops burning fat for fuel. And that makes someone very, very tired because it's very inefficient to be constantly burning carbs for energy. So the person might sometimes in this picture have energy right after the meal, but then they're really tired again right away. So that would be a sign that things are dysfunctional and you need to make changes in how you're eating. Any sign of chronic inflammation or disease would also be a sign that there's a problem with the amount of carbs and sugars and how someone is handling them in the diet. Hormone problems also go back to loss of blood sugar control, and I'll talk about these two things in a minute. Mood issues as well, like I mentioned, the hormones that we make to respond to stress are in response to the blood sugar. So a lot of times when people have mood disorders, there's a loss of blood sugar control also happening that's contributing to the picture. I'm not trying to say it's the entire picture, but working on blood sugar control can help a lot with keeping stress hormones in check and helping the person overall to function better. This graphic sort of puts it all together just to show you how disease is related back to eating too many carbohydrates and sugars and losing blood sugar control. And it's talking about how when you're choosing processed foods, high carbohydrate foods, sugars especially, you will not be getting as many omega-3s in your diet as you need because the staples in the standard American diet are all very high omega-6. So that's one of the blocks pictured here. When you get that omega-3, omega-6 ratio off, it perpetuates inflammation in the body. And somebody eating a lot of high carbohydrate foods and sugars is undoubtedly going to be off in this ratio. I talk about this in more detail in my holistic fats webinar, which you can view on the website. Also, a person would not be getting as many polyphenols. Polyphenols are the beneficial components of plant foods and vegetables and superfoods, and they help protect us against stress and aging. So if you're eating a lot of sugar, it's basically going to drown out any polyphenols you're eating. They're just going to be sucked up in your body's effort to constantly be trying to adjust things due to the high amount of sugar and high amount of insulin being created. People tend to decrease exercise when they're not feeling well and they're losing blood sugar control. They're kind of tired, they're kind of moody, they don't want to exercise. So that, of course, is going to contribute to a downward spiral for health. High sugar foods typically are not high in fiber. So you're losing the fiber and the benefits to the gut flora. And obviously, if you're eating a lot of empty calories from sugary foods, meaning you're getting a lot of calories, but they're not really very healthy for you, they're empty, then that drives lots of inflammation. So we see how all of these factors can contribute to cancer, which isn't listed here, but is well documented in the scientific literature as stemming from too much sugar and loss of blood sugar control, asthma, arthritis, diabetes, aging, obesity, heart disease, allergies, hay fever, psoriasis, Crohn's disease, a lot of autoimmune conditions. So the list goes on and on. I had a mentor early on in my functional medicine training who said that all chronic illness stems from blood sugar, and I think he's right on most accounts, because when we eat the foods high in sugar, they cause our blood sugar levels, our blood glucose, to come up. They cause us to make insulin. They cause something called AGEs. AGEs stand for advanced glycation end products. I talk about these more in the holistic fats talk. So it's kind of too much to go into now, but basically think about when you eat sugar, it binds to the different proteins in your body and caramelizes them. And this causes a lot of damage. So it can lead to cataracts, erectile dysfunction, cancer, a lot of different chronic health issues, skin disorders go back to this AGE process. We also make a lot of triglycerides when we eat sugar. Remember, I said, if you have a lot of pancakes, you got to lie down on the couch. It takes a lot of energy to store extra carbs and sugars for later, but that's what the body is doing. That's why you feel sleepy after you eat those foods. This causes overall cholesterol to increase, so you can see the link to heart disease and heart problems, stroke from too many carbohydrates. You see an increase in the small particle LDL, which is the more damaging type of LDL cholesterol. You see a decrease in the beneficial components of the HDL cholesterol. This is just the average person that eats sugar. These are the known physiological results. For men, we see testosterone decrease. For women, we see estrogen and progesterone shift due to that raise in blood sugar. So hormones very directly play out based on our diet also. Okay, so now I'd like maybe to try something interactive. If you want to type something in the chat, get ready. But I would say I talk to a lot of people. I mentioned that I meet people one-on-one through the co-op. I've been doing that for about 15 years, and look at what they're eating and then try to give them pointers on how to reach their health goals. And so I just typed up, like, this is kind of a stereotypical food log that I might see, where the person starts their day with oatmeal or maybe avocado toast, maybe some fruit, maybe some dried fruit. There's multiple iterations of this pattern, healthy granola, whatever. Then they have a sandwich or maybe like a health bar, something quick at lunch. Maybe the snack is like some cookies or some pretzels or some fruit. And then their dinner would be like a carbohydrate, like pasta or rice, and maybe some vegetables and some proteins, either, animal protein or a vegetarian protein. So what do you guys notice here, just looking at this diet? What would you say, like, are you noticing anything, any patterns? I'm going to look in the chat. Yeah, someone says lots of carbs. Anyone else noticing anything? Too many carbs, not enough protein. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so yeah, high carbs. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But this is really very common, and probably most of you listening in today, you might tweak something to individualize this, but you might begin to see that this pattern may be in the way that you eat or ate at some point. So yes, absolutely. It's very high carbohydrate. That food log shows the bulk of the calories are coming from carbs. And there's not much protein. Maybe they're getting protein at dinner. Maybe they're getting a little protein on their sandwich. But most people need a minimum of 80 to 90 grams of protein a day, which is going to be the equivalent of like a palm-sized serving of protein at each meal. That's what you need to balance your blood sugar. And without that, people develop many cravings because their body is simply undernourished. This is just hot off the press, came out in September of 2023. So you can check out this article. But growing evidence supports this protein leverage hypothesis is a significant mechanism driving obesity. So it's a little bit hard to understand what they're saying here. Basically, what they found in the study and the premise of the presentation is that people crave the amount of protein that they need. If you feed someone protein, they will eat as much protein in a meal as they need to feel full. And that is the only food like that. For carbohydrates, people will just keep eating and eating and they'll overconsume. And the same with fat. People will eat and eat and they'll overconsume. But protein is something your body has to have. They would say, for the average person, 20% of the calories minimum need to be from protein. I would say when I'm working with people, I work primarily with adults. I do see kids, but with adults, we're always wanting to work on building muscle. And to do that, you probably need to be eating 30 to 35% of your calories from protein, but that helps offset a lot of health issues and a lot of the problems with aging if you're actively working on building muscle. So we know one important thing about protein is that we're all naturally wired to want to eat protein and to need protein. And what this study says is that when people are not getting enough protein, they are compensating by eating a lot more calories. That's the crux of this whole presentation. So you see, not eating enough protein, you want to eat carbs and sugar because your body needs that nourishment and it's going to constantly seek it until you get it. If you're not feeding it protein, then you are going to have more problems with craving. So if you want to check out here on the talk, I would say, I have a lot more to say, but this is the number one message to get from the talk today is you've got to eat protein, you've got to eat enough protein, and you've got to eat protein consistently to keep your hormone levels balanced. That includes your blood sugar hormones like insulin and blood sugar control, but also your other hormones, including your reproductive hormones and your stress hormones. If you're not doing that, your body's going to make more stress hormones and it's going to make you hungrier. And that's been shown in a number of scientific studies that you make a lot more cortisol when your blood sugar's not under control or when you're more stressed. And one effect of the cortisol is to make you hungry and make you eat more calories. Okay, here's another example. This one's a little bit different. So let me know what you notice here. In the morning, the person's not really very hungry. So they might have coffee or nothing, or maybe something, but not much. And then at lunch, maybe they're having something, a bar or a salad or some iteration on that. And then at supper, they're having like a good meal, but maybe it's a predictable and a healthy meal, or maybe it's like whatever they can find because they don't have a plan. And then after dinner, they're typically, that's when they have a lot of cravings. So what do you notice about this? Someone wrote lack of protein. Yeah. So lack of protein, again, is a big problem here. This person's very undernourished until the evening when they start eating. And they're not eating enough throughout the day. Yeah, exactly. So this is another common pattern I see with people who crave sugar is, they've got a lot of stress hormones or other hormone imbalance problems because they're not feeding themselves regularly. And when you're not eating enough protein, again, that results in high cortisol, high stress hormones, which leads to poor food choices and just being very, very hungry. This can happen when someone's sleep deprived too. It changes your hormonal composition and you will be very, very hungry compared to a day when you've had really good sleep. And this sort of pattern can also lead to blood sugar swings, which lead to more cravings after the meal. So this is sort of a side note. I have another talk about hormones where we talk about this in more detail, but basically a lot of women have problems with perimenopause and menopause because their blood sugar has been chronically out of balance. They're not eating enough or they're not eating well-timed meals. So they have problems with cortisol, which takes away their resources for their other hormones. Or they've got high blood sugar. And sometimes people have both. People can have problems with low blood sugar and high blood sugar at the same time. When your blood sugar's high, you've got more insulin, and then that insulin is creating more inflammation and perpetuating a hormone imbalance too. And that happens for men too. When men have too many carbs and sugars, it drives down their testosterone and drives up their estrogen, which can create a lot of issues for them and how they're feeling. So I like the paleo diet as an example of a general healthy diet for people. It excludes sugar. There would be some natural forms of carbohydrates like fruits or tubers or starchy vegetables, but there's no grains. There's not a lot of flour-based foods. You're just eating foods in a whole-based form. There's an emphasis on quality proteins, grass-fed proteins, fish, seafood, and lots and lots of vegetables that are good for the gut. I added this in kind of at the last minute this morning. I thought maybe I should show you what I eat, rather than just saying don't eat this way and don't eat this way. Keep in mind, I am actively working on building muscle, and so I eat a fair amount of protein, and that may be more protein than is appropriate for some of you if you're not actively doing strength training and trying to build muscle. I also just have a body type where I know I feel better when I eat more protein. But for breakfast, I start with a protein. This is what I had today. It does vary from day to day based on whether or not I work out that day. Today was not a workout day, so I didn't have a morning snack. But I had eggs, bacon. For my vegetables, I had seaweed, and then I had a little bit of Greek yogurt. At lunch, I had romaine lettuce wraps with roast beef and mustard, and I had some vegetables. Today it was jicama kohlrabi, and then instead of chips, I like these epic pork rinds. I know pork rinds usually don't taste very good, but the ones that they have at the co-op, the Epic brand, are actually really good, the barbecue flavor. So those were a nice, like, salty treat to have with a meal today. Later today, I'll probably have a piece of grass-fed beef jerky, maybe some carrots or turnips, and chlorella, which is a great superfood. It's a green microalgae that helps balance blood sugar. Very nutritious for you. It's kind of like spirulina, but it's fresh water instead. And then for supper, I'm planning to make pork chops and grill some potatoes, and then I'll have a lot of vegetables. I don't know which one yet, maybe green beans or cauliflower. So that's just an example. You can see there's protein at every meal, there's protein at the snack. So every 3 to 4 hours, I'm taking in protein to help keep my cortisol levels balanced, because I know if I go 5 or 6 hours without eating, with the level of activity that I have in my lifestyle, I'm going to be tapping into some stress hormones. And that makes me not sleep very well, or just makes me like extra hungry at the meal and then sort of craving things after the meal. So that protein throughout the day is really important for keeping the blood sugar consistent. When I go out to eat, I choose a high protein meal, because when you do that, it'll keep you from just ordering whatever and anything, that's not really good for you. Sure, you can try different things on the menu, but if you're satiated with the protein, you're not going to overindulge in the other things offered at the restaurant or at the party or whatever it is. So that's like secret number one, is fill up on a good quality protein that works for you. And that's going to help you a lot with overindulging in the foods that really aren't good for you. And the other thing you can see is that I have a habit of eating vegetables throughout the day, especially at lunch and especially at dinner. I'd really try to load up on the low starch vegetables. They're very high in fiber. I actually enjoy eating them. You can definitely cook them. I mean, I'm not saying everybody needs to eat like me. I'm just showing you this as an example. But that's a good way to feel really full and to get those nutritious vegetables without necessarily eating a lot of other very high calorie foods. And you'll see I do have some carbohydrates spread throughout the day. Today, it's mostly low carb, although for dinner I'll have some potatoes. So the level of carbohydrate that's present in the diet will depend on the activity level of the person. If you're very sedentary, if you don't like to exercise, if you're a more sensitive person, then you're going to do much better being very low carb. If you're more active, you'll be able to tolerate more carbs and sugars before and after exercise. So I hope that that gives you some helpful insight. Somebody asked the question, are you saying we should be eating 80 to 90 grams of protein every meal? No. In case that wasn't clear, I would suggest 80 to 90 grams of protein daily as a minimum for most people. If someone was very inactive and more sedentary, then I might drop that protein level down to maybe 60, 65 grams total. So that gets you to, maybe 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal if you eat 3 meals throughout the day. Someone who's actively trying to build muscle or in another stage of their life is going to need even more protein. Like what I've written out here today, this is probably over 130 grams of protein. So there's a range in there based on what the person needs, but emphasizing and getting at least 80 to 90 grams will help balance your blood sugar beautifully and help keep you from craving a lot of sugar. How does fiber fit into this puzzle was another question in the chat. So like I pointed out here, trying to get fiber from whole foods is the best way to do it. And the fiber can help you with feeling full longer. And really the benefit of the fiber is to feed the good gut bacteria and all the benefits that those bacteria provide us. This is a shameless plug for my book that summarizes a lot of this approach to health. It's called The Body Tune-Up. I published it last year, and I'm mentioning it today because I'm about to take a group of 15 people through the Body Tune-Up workshop, which starts next week. So it's a therapeutic way to change your diet. If you like, it helps to have a plan and it helps to have the accountability of a group. So if you're interested in that, I have room for 1 or 2 more people. You can reach out to me. Or you might want to check out my book. It's at the local library. Okay, now we're talking about the tips to dealing with sugar cravings. Tip number 1, eat more fat. Fat is something I talk about in my free hour program on ketogenic diet. So if you really want to get to the nitty gritty about it, I encourage you to check that out. Basically, fats are really satiating. So the fats pictured here, like the coconut oil, olives, eggs, walnuts, butter, when you have cravings, instead of having sugar, pick a high fat food instead. And that will help a lot to begin to satiate your body and kind of get you out of that cycle of insatiability. Here's another example of like a treat. Like if you're sort of addicted to desserts, you could get these keto cups. They do have these at the co-op. It's basically kind of like a Reese's peanut butter cup, but with different things inside. It's very healthy fat. Some of them have MCT oil, which is a medium chain triglyceride oil derived from coconut oil or coconut oil. So they're nice and convenient little treats. And that is healthier than having a high sugar dessert and will be satiating and may help curb some of those cravings. The keto cups are nice and convenient, but they can be costly. You can just Google fat bomb recipe and make your own keto cups or fat bombs at home. You just mix things together and put them in the freezer and they're ready. So very easy to make, very accessible. I wanted to picture this because my kids made me this for Mother's Day one time. So you can see just as an example of a healthier dessert. So I've got some low glycemic fruits here, some berries, and then a little bit of whipped cream with some walnuts, so an example of like a high fat dessert that's very delicious that can replace, something more processed and higher in sugar. You might also want to familiarize yourself with alternative sweeteners. If you do have a sweet tooth, you can use things like monk fruit or stevia. I encourage you, though, to read the label if you're purchasing these things. For example, if you purchase stevia from like a big box store, you will often find that the main ingredient is corn-based and is something called erythritol, which can be very irritating to the digestive system. And there's only a little bit of stevia in there, really making it sweet. So it's important to read the labels, make sure you're really getting stevia, you're really getting monk fruit, and there isn't some other ingredient before that on the label. Allulose is another sugar substitute that we really like in our household. We have a couple kids, so we still make birthday cakes and we make homemade ice cream for special occasions. And instead of using sugar, we use things like allulose, and they taste great. Allulose tastes just like sugar. It doesn't really have a side effect like stevia or monk fruit do. And so it can be a nice alternative. I already sort of beat this horse, I think, but adequate protein is just so important for getting a handle on any dietary pattern where you feel like you want to make a positive change, and if you have cravings that are out of control, you want to get them back under control, and you'll just feel better eating more protein. Protein's great for the metabolism. It's great for your brain, your immune system. I have a whole nother talk about protein, goes all over the ins and outs of that. So it's really important to have an important regular rhythm to your day. You want to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner at about the same time so your body knows it can rely on you to feed it then. That will help a lot with hormone regulation and cravings. Eat 3 balanced meals. Eat a protein every time you eat. Eat a little bit of fat or a lot of fat, depending on the person, when you eat. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is avoiding common allergens, because a lot of times when people are eating a food that's a common allergen or causing inflammation for them or just pretty hard for them to digest, it'll set up unhealthy craving cycles. The common allergens are listed here. So sugar, which obviously you know that's creating a problem because it's creating insulin surges. But gluten, dairy, corn, soy, and peanut. And so I didn't just pick these foods, because I'm on a bandwagon. These foods, with the exception of sugar, are here because they have a large molecular peptide structure. And the way that our immune system works is when our body is under stress and compromised, it's going to flag those foods with the large molecular peptide or protein structure. It's going to be a target for your immune system, and that can lead to chronic inflammation. I talk all about this in the leaky gut talk. But it's good to start with eliminating these foods, at least for a little while, which is why something like the Body Tune-Up workshop that I teach is really helpful. Some people will do an elimination diet on their own, and that's great. And some people need the support of doing it with a group. You also want to think about avoiding foods that are going to set you off for a blood sugar roller coaster. So stimulants like coffee and chocolate will initially make you feel really good, but then are going to drop you off and cause a blood sugar drop. And for some people, they'll experience this more than others. So that can set up unhealthy roller coaster and energy, mood, blood sugar control. Alcohol is also known to contribute to a lot of blood sugar swings because it's tying up the liver, and it can definitely accentuate those blood sugar lows and highs for people and create a lot more havoc in their energy level and their blood sugar control. And then something like a processed like a croissant made from processed flour could potentially do that too, especially if it's not in a balanced meal, or the person's not active enough to really use those calories, because it's going to create a blood sugar spike and then a blood sugar drop. Okay, the next tip would be about minerals, and primarily about salt. Most people need more salt. It's true that a small percentage, I think the percentage is 35 to 40% of people with hypertension might be salt sensitive. So those people shouldn't necessarily be eating a lot of salt, but everybody else, even those with hypertension that are not in that 30 to 40%, and the rest of us who don't have hypertension need a lot of salt. I feel like a broken record, but I have a whole talk. I talk for an hour about salt if you want to know more about this. But basically, your blood sugar control goes up and goes down based on your electrolyte level and based on your sodium level. So if you restrict salt, and maybe you have restricted salt for a long time, your blood sugar may be more prone to be low, and you may be wanting to eat sugar. It's just like the protein in that article I showed you, where if people are undernourished with protein, they're going to keep eating carbohydrates and sugars until their body is satisfied. And the net result will be taking in a lot more calories than they need. It's the same thing with salt. If you restrict salt, your body's seeking it, and it can cause you to make unhealthy choices and eat a lot more things. So just having a good amount of salt, a healthy salt in your diet, can help a lot with the tendency to crave sugar. Incidentally, scientists have found that when people are unrestricted for salt, the average populations around the world, people need about 2 teaspoons of salt a day. That means if you're on a whole foods diet, you're not really eating any processed foods that have salt added, you need to be adding about 2 teaspoons of salt a day. The best salt is Baja Gold. This is a nice raw salt. It's highest in the trace elements and minerals, a lot of great metabolites. You can find this on my website. Celtic sea salt is a good close second, something you could find at the store. My next tip would be to have some kind of a green drink. So you can make a green drink with green leafy vegetables. You can get a green drink powder, which is what's pictured here. You just mix it up in water. This is a great thing to have when someone is having sugar cravings. So if you're the type of person who has cravings all day, you might have it in the morning, like maybe a mid-morning snack or for breakfast. If you're the type of person who only really struggles with cravings in the evenings, then I would have this when you are finished with work and maybe transitioning to make the dinner meal. And the greens, like the chlorella that I was talking about, that I have for my snack every day, the greens help balance your blood sugar levels and are just very nutritive for the body. So it's just a great habit to have instead of having chips or, I don't know, whatever the thing is that you feel like you need to snack on. Having a green drink can be a great kind of placeholder to have there. The next tip would be to work on digestion, and that starts with working on healthy bacteria in the gut. So I've worked with a number of people on overcoming their sugar cravings and kind of doing a whole dietary upgrade. And one of the things that really helps is to have a high volume probiotic. So what I have pictured here are a couple of professional grade probiotics. The ProGrid has 1 trillion units per sample. So that's like having a whole bottle. The probiotic 225 is 225 billion, just to give you an example of the numbers and the quality products that are out there. So taking a high dose probiotic can really help curb sugar cravings. We know a lot of people's cravings come from the bacteria in their gut. Like, for example, people that like chocolate have a specific part of their microbiome that's different than people that don't like chocolate. So anyway, it can help to get an extra flush of good bacteria in the gut when you're starting off on a plan to get away from sugar. You also need things that help strengthen your digestion, because if you're not fully digesting your food or getting the nutrients you need from your food, then your body's going to be constantly seeking to eat something else. It's not really very healthy for it. I like this formula OrthoDigestzyme, which is pictured here, because it's got support for the liver with bile flow. It's got digestive enzymes, and it's got betaine HCl to help with the stomach. So it's a nice combo formula. Something that's not as strong as that, but can help with digestion, is to take a teaspoon or a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in water, or use it as a marinade in your foods. It's very good at helping to stimulate the digestive secretions. It's also really important to think about having enough liver support. The liver helps us with detoxification, regular gut health, hormone balance. And so there are a number of things that support the liver listed here. It's also important to think about the gut. The gut lining is only one cell layer thick, and it does actually play a role in balancing blood sugar levels. So sometimes when I'm helping someone with leaky gut or hyperimpermeable intestines, I actually find that their blood sugar control is much better. I have a whole nother talk about leaky gut, but basically leaky gut happens when we're under a high amount of stress or go through a life change where there's more stress, such as pregnancy, having children, having a stressful or traumatic event or accident, having surgery, having low vitamin D levels will lead to leaky gut. There's a lot of glyphosate or Roundup in the food supply and water supply now, and we know that that can cause leaky gut. So sometimes you need to take some special things that help seal up leaky gut. If you're interested in that, check out my program on my website where you can watch it for free. Another thing that can really help is to write down what you're eating, right? Like, let's say you decide, I really value my health. I have this certain health goal, and I want to eat in line with my values. If you start writing down or logging what you're eating, then you're going to see where you're making choices that aren't in line with your values. And it's going to make it easier for you to make a change and begin to choose the right things that will be in line with your values and will help you get to your goal. Another thing that can be really helpful is to look at your blood chemistry. And this is one of the things that I do with people one-on-one. For example, many times if the thyroid hormone is slightly out of range, they may not even have a medical thyroid condition, but it's out of range enough where they're having blood sugar problems, then it can really help to address that naturally. Or there might be an electrolyte imbalance or some other imbalance that somebody like myself trained in functional medicine is able to identify by looking at the lab work. And so when you look at the lab work functionally, I'm a lot more critical about trying to optimize the values than whether or not they're just medically normal or not. You don't always get very much information about really trying to tweak the types of things I'm talking about from just looking to see if something's medically normal or not. You really need to get more sophisticated and look at, is her sodium optimum? Is her potassium optimum? Is her magnesium optimum? How is the thyroid? How is the vitamin D? How is the iron? How is the B12? All of these things are physiologically so important and can really make a big difference when someone's working to optimize their health. And lastly, I have a tip for sleeping. If you're not sleeping enough or you don't have a good sleep schedule, we know that you're going to be more insulin resistant, which of course is going to make the blood sugar control and the cravings worse. And we also know that when someone doesn't get a good night's sleep, their hormone balance is off, making them a lot hungrier. So just trying to get into a good sleep schedule, having good sleep hygiene, where your room is set up to support sleep, and the habits before you go to bed are set up to support a good night's sleep will pay off in the long run. Okay, so got through most of the program here. Hopefully you gained maybe a little more understanding about how sugar really can impact our health negatively, and maybe feel a little bit motivated to make some changes. I talked about the underlying tendencies that contribute to cravings. So if you're a little bit insulin resistant, you're not getting enough protein, you've got too many stress hormones, or you're not getting enough sleep, all of those are things that affect someone's cravings. If you're not getting enough salt and you're not getting enough minerals, that too can contribute to more cravings. The way to address that is to have things that are more satiating in your diet, more fat, more protein every time you eat. Do not eat a carb by itself. I didn't talk about this yet, but that will really help keep your blood sugar under control, is when you do have a form of carbohydrate, to have it with a protein. Avoid the common allergens. We talked about those, like gluten, dairy, soy. More salt, more good sea salt, more greens, like a green drink or other easy fixes to get more greens and bitter greens in your diet helps. support healthy digestion, write down what you're doing, test for underlying imbalances, and get better sleep. So hopefully some of these ideas will stick. Maybe you're not able to do them all, but hope that that's helpful. I do offer, like I said, the $45 sessions through the co-op. So that's a nice deal if you want to have a private session with me. My workshop, where I take a group of people through the type of therapeutic upgrade that I've been talking about during this talk, starts next week. So I have a couple spots of that left if anybody's interested. And then again, next month, I'll be talking about the thyroid gland. Here's my book that also summarizes a lot of the things that I talked about today. If you're looking to maybe want to read about it, read about how these things affect health, how blood sugar affects health, and how you can have a plan to change your dietary habits to get better. So thank you so much.